Pokemon has seen its fair share of terrifying theories since the very beginning. I think we're all familiar with classic ones like Ash being in a coma since Season 1, the Lavender Town Syndrome, dead trainers, the Pokemon War, and Cubones wearing their mother's skulls on their heads. Oh, wait, that's real? What the fuck? Well, I guess creepy and Pokemon just go hand in hand. It's really no wonder when you have actual Pokedex entries like Cubones and dozens of others that are absolutely terrifying, if not a bit soul-crushing. But that sort of added horror also brings along a sort of charm to Pokemon and makes it more fleshed out other than, well, most RPGs that were at the time available. But with Pokemon seemingly embracing creepy stuff, fans too embrace the weird and cynical to the downright nihilistic with some of their fan theories, such as one popular dark theory that the Pokemon world is actually just Earth but in a post-apocalyptic aftermath, and that every Pokemon is just a spawn of a real-world animal mutated by the fallout. You know, honestly, I just made that one up myself, but I bet someone has already beat me to it. But hey, speaking of nukes, one legitimately real theory that a lot of players, mostly in Japan, have thought up is the one where Regis are supposedly representative of the atomic bombs that were dropped on Japan. More specifically, according to the theory, they're a representation of Hibakusha. Hibakusha describes those who were directly affected that day when the bombs were dropped, be they survivors of either the Hiroshima bombings or the Nagasaki bombings. I wouldn't recommend googling Hibakusha if you're squeamish. I won't say it's incredibly gory, but the imagery is still pretty disturbing, and there's a lot of surviving photography of Hibakusha, their scars, their bodies, and art pieces that represent that day. This is a really popular theory among the Japanese community, and it's seldom ever heard outside of Japan. It's actually kind of interesting because it really makes you wonder what other kind of theories there are out there from different countries. Though, I'm getting off track here. For those of you who are unfamiliar, the Regis are representative of the legendary Pokemon trio Regirock, Regice, and Registeel, and according to this theory, they somehow represent the nuclear tragedy that befell Japan. And yes, I acknowledge that this is a pretty absurd theory. Honestly, I'm really not the sort to make theory videos in the first place, but this one really caught my eye for a few reasons. For one, yes, we can acknowledge that this is a very far-fetched theory. Even if Game Freak gets a little disturbing with their Pokemon descriptions at times, they've never really done anything like this before, right? Well, maybe not before, but they did have an Easter egg that, yes, actually acknowledges the Hiroshima and Nagasaki bombings directly after Pokemon's third generation with Pokemon Pearl and Diamond. According to Shiny Hunter Map, a guy who's really into Pokemon and hopefully not children, discovered within Diamond and Pearl's coding that players receive encounter rate bonuses depending on the day they play. Most of these days are attributed to positive dates or holidays from all over the globe, such as Independence Day, Hinamatsuri, Christmas Eve, Festa de la Repubblica, St. Patrick's Day. Hey, that's my birthday, by the way. They all receive 5% encounter rate bonuses, while days like Masuda's birthday, you know, one of the big main creators of Pokemon, and Tanabata receives 10% bonuses. Yet, there's this flip side to this where players get a negative encounter rate for certain days. Now, at first glance, it's really nothing special. Yes, it's a bit odd that festive holidays such as Christmas and Obon get a 5% decrease, but maybe we can chalk that up to the developer simply wanting kids to enjoy the day and maybe not play video games. I don't know. But when you see what days decrease by 10%, you begin to think that there might be something to this Regi theory after all. These days that decrease the encounter rates by 10% include New Year's Day, the spring equinox, the autumn equinox, and 3 that seem really out of place. And those are the Hiroshima bombings, the Nagasaki bombing, and 9/11. That is kind of freaky, I'm not gonna lie. I mean, yeah, a Japanese company acknowledging a Japanese tragedy isn't really freaky in itself, but the fact that it was coded into the game that these days specifically are days to avoid, something about that is weird, don't you think? I don't know, maybe it's just me. I mean, it's not really like it's noticeable, which is probably why nobody knew about this, well, Easter egg for about a few years. I mean, it was only just discovered last year. But could this mean that these Regis are also part of the planned design? If they've already implemented code to decrease the odds of encounter on certain national tragedies, who's to say some Pokemon aren't designed by others to represent certain holidays and tragedies? I mean, there is one specific Pokemon who pretty much represents Christmas itself. But let's actually observe some evidence to back up this claim. As is true for the first 4 generations of Pokemon, each region is based on Japan. So for example, the Kanto region is based on, well, the Kanto region, the Johto region is based on the Kansai region, and the Hoenn region, where we find the 3 Regis, is based on Kyushu, a prefecture in Japan located in the southwestmost region. This is the prefecture where Nagasaki is. You can see the resemblance of Hoenn to Kyushu if we rotate the map in a 90-degree angle counterclockwise. Not a one-to-one comparison, but there are similarities. According to the theory, each Regis is located on the map where the real-world equivalent of Miyazaki, Nagasaki, and the Oita prefectures are, towns where aerial assaults and bombings were frequent, including, of course, the nuking of Nagasaki. Now, I've tried overlaying Hoenn with Kyushu while also including the Regis locations, and again, while not a one-to-one comparison, it's difficult to say this part of the theory actually aligns. Registeel's location in the ancient tomb does match up with Miyazaki, sure, and Regirock's location in the Desert Ruin, it's vaguely aligning with Oita. Regice's location within the island cave does not even remotely come close to Nagasaki, however. In fact, it makes more sense that the island cave's real-world equivalent would be Iki, and while I'm not too sharp when it comes to Japanese history, Iki just seems like the kind of place that would inspire a secretive video game island, but if we were talking about World War II Pokemon theories, well, this was a place that was heavily fortified with coastal artillery during World War II. But you gotta keep in mind that during this war, most of Japan was fortified and weaponized, so it's not really a unique case. If this really did align with locations where significant bombings occur, then Nagasaki is left out, which, according to this overlay, would probably be Slateport City. So the theory's already a bit wobbly, but we're not done yet. The second part of the theory relies on the original Japanese text found within the Seal Chamber and Regi Caves. More interestingly is the writing on the wall that said, "In this cave we have lived." Yet in the Japanese version, it adds to the quote saying instead, "In this cave we have lived and survived." The translations aren't wrong, because the phrase used is actually true, it's just a matter of context, though some players believe the context is meant to be interpreted to live on or survived. If true, it would almost make it seem like the people who lived within these caves did so due to harsh circumstances, maybe a huge war brewing or an end-of-the-world sort of catastrophe. It also gets interesting when you read the entire message, and the people mention how they feared the Regis so much that they sealed them away, much like how in real-world nukes, they're feared by everyone. Then there are the bizarre instructions, which I won't read at all, but you're welcome to pause the video and read the instructions yourselves. While these instructions are esoteric and hard to interpret, many believe that this is symbolic of the day the nukes dropped. For example, the fact that you have to use dig represents those who dug air raid shelters for citizens in order to protect themselves from, well, air raids. Wailord and Relicanth could be representative of Fat Man and Little Boy, the names of the nukes dropped on both Nagasaki and Hiroshima respectively. And interestingly enough, when you follow the instructions, a violent earthquake occurs, possibly representing the explosions that shook the earth outside while everyone stayed in the shelter. After that, you'd have to wait 2 minutes to proceed to the next step, which could mean multiple things. The number 2 representing the 2 bombs that were dropped, or it could be a moment of silence for both Hiroshima and Nagasaki, 1 minute of silence each, with a new time, hope, and love aimed to the sky in the middle. This phrase would be interpreted in multiple different ways. It could mean, as always, to be aware of the skies for any new dangers, or it could mean to move on and for the new generations to live life with hope and love, unlike our previous predecessors who used hate and violence to get their way. At least, that's how I see it. Oh yeah, and we can't forget that the message are all written in Braille, a method of writing used to communicate with those who are visually impaired, using their sense of touch instead of using their sight. It's always been very confusing to many players, including myself, as to why Game Freak used Braille to encrypt their hidden message. It's not like we can touch the screen and feel the letters. Well, for many, this is symbolic too. Players believe that this is representative of the nukes dropping on Hiroshima and Nagasaki. Those who were caught within the blast were either blinded from foreign objects flying towards their face, or due to the heat melting their eyes off or their eyelids shut. And if the blast itself won't blind them, then just looking at the explosion will. Many people, including several people outside of the blast radius, were blinded by the impact of the nuke itself, as it erupted like a miniature sun and burned away their retinas. These victims were blinded for life and had to learn Braille in order to read anything, hence the Braille used in game. Now admittedly, so far the evidence that I've shown is pretty speculatory, and honestly it doesn't really hold much weight. However, we've yet to talk about the Reggies themselves and how they fit into this theory, and trust me when I say things get a bit more interesting after this. So what's the point of the Reggie theory if we're not even going to talk about them at all? Well, aside from their locations anyways. Well, I think you'd be surprised to hear that the Reggie theory holds more weight to its credibility when you actually examine the Pokemon itself. I mean, I guess that makes sense. It's called the Reggie theory for a reason. What a stupid thing. Why did I write that? Anyways, the first aspect of their design we'll look at is, of course, their character sprites, and believe it or not, their footprints. What could be so important about that? Well, if we examine Regice and Registeel's design, the two seem eerily like that of a bomb dropping from the air and a mushroom cloud forming as a result of the explosion. Looking at the footprint, some players believe that the small little dot is the same perspective a pilot would have as they drop the bomb. It would get smaller and smaller until eventually it'd be nothing more than a dot. Then suddenly, it sends shockwaves across the land, which is what we see with Registeel's footprint. Meanwhile, we have Regirock, who I've left out thus far, but only cause I've really been saving the most disturbing for last. Many players believe that Regirock itself represent the Hibakusha, the victims of the explosion. Malformed, uneven skin, bubbling or oozing out of its body, seemingly mangled up and destroyed, much like how many of the survivors ended up during the bombing. After the bombs were dropped, thousands upon thousands of survivors ended up dying within months to years after the initial explosion due to radiation, and those who survived all of that ended up with permanent scars or burns or crippling effects of their body for the rest of their lives. The footprint on Regirock looks seemingly like that of a bug, some believing that this could align with the common urban myth that most bugs can survive a nuclear blast or the fallout that ensues after. Now, to be fair, the footprint is widely regarded to be a reference to a certain type of beetle known as the sacred beetle. What can be considered a bit more credible, however, is the fact that the Reggies are the only Pokemon to learn the move Explosion at level 1. This is the only move they can learn until level 9. This changed with Sword and Shield's release, however, and they can now learn Explosion at level 78, and their level 1 moves have changed, but for the past 15 years, they were the only Pokemon with this unique trait, solidifying the bomb theory even further. And if we're going to reach that far, we might as well mention that starting in Gen 4, each of the Reggies could learn Hyper Beam, known as Destruction Beam, at level 89. Could this be a reference to the date when Fat Man was dropped on Nagasaki, that being August 9th? The most common format of date in Japan is the year followed by month followed by the day, so it could just be that. But with all this talk of nukes and moves, is it possible that the Reggies could take it a step further and perhaps have a move that was a direct reference to nuclear power? Well, actually, yeah, there kind of is. Each of the Reggies can also learn Ancient Power, which in Japanese is Genshi no Chikari, meaning primeval power. Yet, what's interesting about that is that Genshi no Chikari is also a direct homophone of nuclear power, meaning, while not spelled the same way, the two words are pronounced the same way in Japanese. Fuck my phone. Now, there is more evidence out there to support this theory, but it's all up to speculation by the end of the day. I personally am convinced that somehow the original 3 Reggies were some sort of allegory to war and military weaponry, but I never would have guessed that they'd somehow be connected to World War II specifically. It makes sense, after all, the legendaries are based on, well, legends and myths, but who's to say that should limit Game Freak's creations? Maybe there are other Pokemon based on war itself. As for the Reggies, are they also based on war by chance? I can't really say for sure, but I have heard that Regigigas is apparently located near World War II memorials, somewhere in Hokkaido, provided if we, overlay Sinnoh with Hokkaido anyways, but I'm not really familiar with Gen 4, so I can't say for certain if that is the case. As for Regieleki and Drake, I don't know who these. I've not played the new DLCs. Anyways, they're the newest Reggies as of Gen 8. Well, I highly doubt they're related to this theory at all. Not only are they not located anywhere in Galar at all, I also think they represent the Middle Ages more than they do World War II, especially seeing as how that's kind of the whole motif in Galar. Also, you gotta keep in mind that it's been 15 years since the original Legendary Titans were released, so bearing in mind that most of the newer games are being made by a new generation of programmers and writers, it's really unlikely that they would team up with those people who made those theories or made those Pokemon back in Gen 3. But I could be proven wrong. Who knows? The lore keeps getting deeper, and the mysteries of this game remain elusive. We may never actually know the truth, but who knows? Maybe we're closer to the truth than we could ever know.